Awesome. Hi, thank you so much for joining us today at our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion event. I'm Brandi Jones, the Organizing Director at Secure Families Initiative, and I'm here with Alexis McDonald, who is our new Black Caucus Chair. Thank you so much for tuning into part one of our four-part series on diversity, equity, and inclusion and our military families featuring Blue Star families. At the end of this new year, our team at SFI began reading a powerful and timely report by Blue Star Families titled The Diverse Experiences of Military Veteran and Families of Color. This groundbreaking study provided unparalleled insight into how military families experience military life. We are so happy to have C.T. Moss, Director of Campaign for Inclusion, and Jessica Strong, Senior Director for Applied Research at Blue Star Families, here to chat with us today. Hi, everyone. If you wanted to introduce yourselves a little further, it'd be great.
Sure. Thank you, Brandi, for having us today. My name is Carlandra Moss. I go by CT. I'm the director for our campaign for inclusion here at Blue Star Families. Just a little bit about myself. I am a retired Army First Sergeant with 24 years of service. I hail from Tampa, Florida. I have 24 years of experience in leadership, training, community relations, and a little bit about my background. I have an MBA and concentration in social media marketing. But my proudest role is now being a military mom. My daughter is serving in the Air Force, and my son is in the Army. And this is really, truly the reason why I am super excited to share this platform with my battle buddy, Dr. Jessica Strong, and this amazing work. And we're excited to be here today. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful.
Thank you, CT. It's always a delight to do a presentation with you. It's always fun to work together. I am Jessica Strong. I'm the Senior Director of Applied Research at Blue Star Families. That means I oversee all the research projects that we do, including our Campaign for Inclusion research, but also some of the other research projects like our Military Family Lifestyle Survey and military spouse employment work, and so on. I also am an Army spouse of we're coming up on 17 years now. I always have to remind myself because, like many other military couples, we got married twice. So I have to remind myself which anniversary we're talking about. So been a spouse for 17 years. My husband is just promoted to Master Sergeant. So been living this Army life for a little while. And I come to Blue Star Families after a PCS. Again, derailed my career a little bit, but brought me to Blue Star Families where I get to work with cool people like CT. My background is in social work, so I was a professor of social work before moving over into this nonprofit sort of research policy advocacy sort of role. So I'm glad to be here today and to help share this information that we've gathered through our report from research that we started in 2021, and there will be more coming up in the next few months. And so we are continuing this conversation. So back to you, Brandi.
Wonderful. Going back to the report, if you could share what makes the report so unique. I mean, there were so many things. I know Alexis and I both being military children, even ourselves, there were so many things that stood out that I had always wondered, and I felt like this report addressed it. But if you could share more.
Yeah, I'll start that. Well, I'll start CT and then I'll toss it over to you because I know you have some thoughts as well. To me, what this report is so special because it is the first one that really focused on military and veteran families of color. There had been and continues to be to some degree a narrative that the military doesn't see color. Everybody is green, and all the experiences are exactly the same because it's a meritocracy, and it doesn't matter what your race or ethnicity is. It just matters how hard you work. And what we're seeing in this report is that there are different experiences for military and veteran families of color. And this is the first time this has sort of been brought to light. And I think every time we do this presentation, I hear from people that, yes, this piece resonated with me because I had this experience. And that is really eye-opening to share with others that these are experiences that people have been having for a long time, but are finally being brought to light.
And thank you, Jessica. I have to give kudos to Jessica and her team. When our research team began exploring the literature in late 2020, it became clear that while lots of research had been conducted regarding service members and veterans of color, there was virtually no literature that existed regarding the experiences of military spouses and children of color. And me being a military child, military spouse, military service member, and now a military mom, I started to think about that, and I'm like, yeah, it does not exist. And so, Dr. Strong, Jessica, and her team conducted a comprehensive needs assessment to address those gaps. We asked questions. I like to put myself in that boat, but it really was Jessica and her team that asked questions that had never been asked before. And the consensus data that we were able to share and have results were uncovered, trends were uncovered that we're going to talk a little bit about today. But Jessica and her team worked with IVMF, and our research was approved by the Institution Review Board by Syracuse University. So Jessica had to make sure that I put that in there, just for those data nerds who kind of wanted to know. So back over to you, Brandi.
Oh, that's just amazing. And I know Alexis has our first question concerning.
I do. Thank you, Brandi. So, CT and Jessica, the findings in this report on our Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islander military families of color is groundbreaking. This is a statistic that really stood out to me. Active duty family respondents of color make decisions about military life based on perceptions of racism and fear of their family's safety in communities. Nearly half of active duty, 46% family respondents of color report they have considered racial and ethnic discrimination when ranking their preferences for installations, and 42% consider concerns about safety due to theirs or their family's racial and ethnic identity. And 54% active duty service member respondents of color feared for their safety due to their race or ethnicity in their civilian communities at least once since January of 2020. That's a lot of statistics and a lot to unpack there. So can you share your thoughts on this, particularly when it comes to retention in the military?
Sure. Can I go first, Jessica? It makes me think about how, oftentimes we think of the service member. We only think of the service member when it comes to retention. But military families are sitting around the dinner table. They're discussing these big decisions about military life based on perception of racism and fear for their family's safety in the communities. And I have my own personal story that I may share later. But you may ask why this is important. These decisions undermine military efforts to retain a diverse force. I often think about the data point that Jessica and her team has shared with me, and that is by 2027, so in 4 years, the most recruitable U.S. adult will be a person of color. That is why this is so important to retention. We want to be able to continue to have a diverse military. It makes our military stronger. And that is why, we're here on this platform. And thank you again. I can't say it enough. Thank you for having us today. But those are my thoughts. Jessica.
Well, I agree, CT, and going off of some of the things that you're talking about with families sitting around the dinner table, when as military families, we know when there's the potential for PCS on the horizon, we sit down and we go, okay, what are the pros and cons of each potential duty station that may be available to us? What are the opportunities for a spouse's career? What are the opportunities for a kid's education? When we add in another complex layer of what is the community going to be like? Is it going to be safe for my kids, for my spouse, for my family? Then that adds another layer of complexity into decisions that people are making that can enhance or it can hinder their career. So we're talking about career progression. We're talking about family. Like, it's always that balance in the military between what does the military need for military readiness and what does my family need? I feel like that's a constant balance. And this is another layer that adds into the decisions that you make around that balance. What CT said about family, in 5 years, the majority of youth will be people of color. We also want to think about the families that are currently in, military families of color that are currently in service, or military moms like CT. When your kids are looking at, when those military kids are growing up and they're looking at joining the military, your experiences as a military family of color are going to influence whether you recommend that they join the military or not. We know that most of our military families today, most of our service members are attached to the military, were attached to the military in some way before that. They come from military families where there's a tradition of service. So if families of color are making decisions about where they're going, or even whether they're going to stay in, they're also going to make decisions about whether they recommend service to their children and whether those children go on to eventually join the military as well. So it has far-ranging implications if we don't listen to all of the voices.
Yes.
Yep, that's so
And if
true.
I could just add one more point, Alexis, I'm sorry.
No, don't
that
be
I
sorry.
think it is important for us to mention, because you will hear us talk a lot about military families of color, but something that also came out was that 1 of 4 military families come from a biracial or multiracial, multicultural family. So oftentimes the service member may be not a person of color, but their family is, and so there's a broader family dynamics here that I think is also worth mentioning.
Yes, it's so important that you all are even, highlighting this, and that's what makes this report so important, and for us to, elevate your findings, because these are things that we need to begin thinking about. And, if it's not a military family that may be seeing this report, it's someone who may know them or someone who interacts with them, or, even decision makers and other stakeholders. So thank you again, for just even taking up to do this research.
Yes. I do so we have a question in the chat. From the chat, is the data from literature review, or did your organization conduct studies? If so, what was the sample size and how did you gather that sample?
I do love a good research question. Thank you for whoever asked this, because this is my jam. So one of the things that we wanted to do is, when we set out to do this research, we wanted to be rigorous. We wanted to be able to do it systematically, in a way that we gather as many voices as possible in the most rigorous way that we can. So we started with literature reviews, as CT mentioned, and then after the literature reviews, we developed and conducted a series of focus groups of military and veteran families of color, including both English and Spanish speaking focus groups. So we started with that. We do the exploratory work and focus groups. From that work, we then developed a survey, which we fielded across the nation, actually across the world, really, in the summer of 2021, where we gathered responses from over 2,700 respondents, and that is where we're pulling this information from. So we gathered that from what we typically do for our survey research, through social media, through our membership networks, through email, through partner organizations. We had a specific effort to reach out to military families of color through survey ambassadors. We gathered a series of many volunteer survey ambassadors who could reach out to families of color to make sure that we are gathering your voices in ways that we typically hadn't. So we really tried to reach out to as many military families of color as we could, and as broad and as diverse military families of color as we could, to gather all of this to make this report. And then the final step of it was a series of many stakeholder briefings, where we took this information and shared it with decision makers at all levels, and gathered feedback on, these are the recommendations that we think we should make as a result of this data. What are you seeing? Help us refine these and make these actionable, targeted recommendations that will actually help military families of color. CT, anything to add there? I know you participate in a lot of those briefings.
Yes, I was just thinking that it became very clear quickly that we had an overwhelming interest in our research, because within 48 hours of sending out our first email, we had over 460 individuals sign up to participate in the focus groups that Jessica just mentioned. So there was definitely a need, and we were just very happy that we had individuals that trusted us to be able to share and tell their stories.
Wow, that's amazing. And thank you for having such equitable data. I know that recently I've been looking at a lot of data and I noticed some of our people of color are missing from those statistics and kind of like grouped into like a category like mixed races. So I really appreciate how you took the time to make sure everyone's represented in this data. Alexis, I know you had a second question.
Oh, yes, we'll jump into that.
I don't know that.
So another finding from your research, I was hoping that we could discuss is concerning policing. And I know that that has been an issue, at the forefront lately, especially for families of color, specific and military families of color as well. At SFI, we advocate on behalf of military families' concerns in policing, such as our work on the 1033 program. When I came across this following statistic, it really resonated with me as a Black military spouse. Active duty family respondents of color report experiencing harassment and police profiling across all US regions, both on and off installation since January 2020. 1 in 3 Black active duty family respondents report experiencing profiling by police on and off installations since January 2020, the highest of any racial ethnic subgroup. 1 in 3 active duty family respondents of color report experiencing at least one incident of being threatened or even harassed in their local civilian or military community since January of 2020. So, can you share your thoughts on this, particularly when it comes to active duty family respondents fearing for their safety in their civilian community due to their race or ethnicity?
I was going to let you go first, CT, because I know you have a very powerful personal story about this if you wanted to share that. The statistics, I think, speak for themselves. Nobody should be afraid for their safety in their civilian community, their military community, particularly when they're in service to the nation. But I wanted to pass it over to you, CT, because your story is so powerful.
Thank you, Jess. Within my 24 years, I don't believe that I had ever experienced racism. I've always lived on base and had a sense of security living on base. There was one duty station that was a very small remote and they didn't offer base housing. So I lived in the community when I was stationed in a small town in Mississippi. And during that time, my son was racially, he was 13, tall for his age. But of course, if you had a conversation with him, you clearly knew he was 13 and just beginning high school, and he was racially profiled in the neighborhood we lived twice. And because of that, I no longer felt that he was safe in the community that we were living in. So I had to make a tough decision, sitting around the dinner table talking to family, and we made the decision that he would not live with me. And so for his entire high school years, he did not live in my home. And that was a tough time for me. And it's something that my family and I, we just dealt with on our own. But even being a senior leader, it never occurred to me then, and this was, back in 2017, it didn't occur to me to go to my chain of command, to talk about it within the ranks. And so that's why it's so important for leaders to ask those questions to the service members and their families, that how are they doing, and do they feel a sense of belonging in the communities in which they live? Because as you know, we don't have the privilege to always choose where we live because we're serving. But despite that, I do believe that we should feel a sense of welcome, a sense of safety. And it's something that I tucked away from me for years and never talked about until I started working with Blue Star families in this important work. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I tucked away this story for so many years and never even thought to discuss it, outside of my family. And so thank you all for listening. And I hope that it is able to help others.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that, CT. And I'm so sorry that your family had to experience that. And I think that kind of leads us into what also was really amazing about the report was that there were direct quotes from some of the respondents. And so I'd like to take the time to read two of those quotes I think really capture what CT is discussing with us. One quote from a Black military spouse from the report said, "We tried to do family activities like farmers market or festivals, but we always feel unwanted. We even at first, and we thought maybe it was just us. So we would continue to try and have small talk and or even say hi, how are you in passing. Still no response. It makes me feel like I'm disgusting." And that's really just heartbreaking. And I have a second quote. "As an officer's wife and a veteran living on post, it meant not fitting into our community. Not many looked like me or my family. I'll never forget the time we elected to say hi to stay at post housing. After forcing our neighbor to engage in a conversation, I was told that they thought we were part of the cleaning team." And then these quotes are so powerful and just heartbreaking, and they really resonated with me also as a Black military spouse. I often hear statements about diversity within our military community, but what I rarely hear discussed is inclusion um, and equity within our military family community. I know at the end of this important research, some recommendations were made. Which recommendation would you say is a game changer and a best way to build stronger relations and more inclusive military and veteran communities?
Well, I'm coming from sorry, CT. I was quicker off the mute. It's a game of mute chicken, and I think I won. I come from a research perspective. I'm a little bit biased in this. My approach is we need to understand what the experiences are, understand what the situation is for people before we can craft good recommendations and good next steps forward. So for me, the finding or the recommendation that I think will help move the needle the most is gathering data, having good data on which we can understand how many military family members are people of color, because we don't really know that. We know a little bit about service members, we know a little bit about spouses, but we don't know about children. We don't know about the family makeup. We don't even know what our military families look like. So for me, that is the starting step. We kind of have to have a grasp of the group that we're talking about before we can move forward. CT, I know you have some others that you like.
A few things that come to mind, mentorship and allyship. Everyone can improve the experiences of military families. Providing forums like this one so that we can discuss these issues. But also, I think the top requested allyship action was to call out inappropriate comments and behaviors when they happen. I have colleagues that talked about hearing, being the third party and hearing may not have been directed to them, but hearing it and not saying anything. And so now that they reflect on it, they realize that I could have been a part of the solution by just being support, and just working to be able to make someone feel included. I always like to say that when you invite someone to the party, it's okay to invite everyone to the party, but you want everyone to be able to dance. And that's that inclusion piece. The diversity comes with, we invited everyone, but the inclusion in piece is to allow everyone to dance. And that means that we're all going to have to listen to different genre of music. But that is just also a way to ensure that we're being more inclusive. And as far as the mentorship piece, I think that we can work together to expand those mentorship opportunities, including the military spouses and not to mention our children of color.
Absolutely. I mean, at SFI, we like to believe that our military families have a unique role in this moment because of our identity, our service, and our unique experience and our networks. And we like to ensure that all of our voices are heard within this community. And I really feel that the Blue Star Families report does just that. And I appreciate you sharing with us today. I know I have another question in the chat I wanted to get to before we close out. When it comes to policing and racial profiling, and is it specific to community police, or is it an issue with the MPs on the base as well?
What we saw in the survey is that this was an issue across different situations, across on base, off base, in all communities, everywhere. Now, it was the proportion that reported experiencing profiling from civilian police was higher than military police. But the fact that military service members and families are profiled by military police who are part of the same community is perhaps even more alarming, even more worrisome. So, yeah, it occurred in all places.
I think I would like to take this moment to share, if you in our audience watching today are wanting to discuss more about policing advocacy at SFI, we do have a leadership team if you're interested in joining, where we discuss these issues. I think that's all the questions from the chat. And I just want to close by saying thank you so much for Blue Star Family and your groundbreaking report on the diverse experiences of military and veteran families of color. Thank you, CT and Jessica, for coming on today, and all the work that you're doing within our community is needed, and it's so inspiring. This is so amazing to be here talking with you about this and this moment. As a spouse of like 20 years, I just never thought these would be the issues that we would be discussing. To find out more about the report, please go to bluestarfamilies.org or at securefamilies.org, where we're also sharing the data. As a FI, we encourage our audience to learn, and it's Black History Month, so of course we say all Black history is American history, and we want you to advocate for all those within our community, especially the stories you heard here today. So I want to close by saying thank you so much. And Alexis, our new Black Caucus chair, if you're interested, we have our BIPOC caucuses as well, and we are looking for members. Thank you, everyone, for coming today.
Thank you for inviting us and allowing us to highlight this work. And thank you for all the work that you're doing with the Secure Families Initiative as well.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.